Righty-ho, so this is our last part of our Napoleon character study, part 3. Righty-ho, so here we have the start of chapter 8, and Beasts of England has been banned. It is no longer needed because the rebellion has taken place, and what is to replace Beasts of England in the hearts and the minds of the animals is Minimus's poem. And Minimus's poem is increasingly ludicrous when we think about what's happened structurally. In chapter 7, we've had the horror of the show trials. We've had the horror of the pile of corpses and the attack on Boxer, and we've had the smell of blood in the air. We've had that use of graphic language, and then we have this piece of propaganda which is so hyperbolic, which is so over the top that it just appears ludicrous and out of place when we consider where the animals are. So Minimus's poem is a paean, and by that we don't mean a paean as in a sore tooth. We mean a paean as in a hymn of praise. A hymn of praise often to a deity. And if you look at the language here that's being used to discuss Napoleon, to honour Napoleon, then you can see how godlike Napoleon is being presented. So let's have a wee look at this, and then we'll look at some analysis of it. So, thou art the giver of all thy creatures' love, full belly twice a day, clean straw to roll on. Again, what we've seen all the way through is the idea that Napoleon knows the basic instincts of the animals. Now, he's not even giving them this any longer, but it's being presented as if he were. So let's have a wee look at this in a more analytical way. So the ridiculousness of this piece of propaganda is so laughable had we not been immersed in the graphic, horrific events of chapter 7. So just as you can see here, you have that idea of the dramatic irony. We are aware of how ludicrous and how hollow this piece of propaganda sounds. It's got that hyperbolic tone, and it would be laughable, but the shocking events of chapter 7 make its lightheartedness seem hard to stomach, because we've just seen the genocide that has occurred, and it can be excused because it's all in the cause of safeguarding Napoleon and safeguarding animalism. The poem uses language of prayers, and you often find that with, again, that word that it is a paean, because a paean is a hymn of prayer to a deity, and it has the old-fashioned diction as well, used when praising a god, and it's important because subtly it implies how godlike Napoleon has become. He's got the power over life, the power of life over death, and we just witnessed that in chapter 7 with, that graphic phrase of the pile of corpses. And he has become deified, and deified means to make into a god through the process of deification. So Deification, and this. So if you think about it, the propaganda that emerges post chapter 7 is about deification. It's no longer just that it's our comrade leader Napoleon, but it's our God that we must worship, that we must venerate in some way. The final line of the verse reminds the reader of the simple hopes of the animals to have a full belly and clean stall. That's what it was all about. That was what it was all about, even from chapter 1. And the terrible thing is how far removed from those simple desires the entire process has come. Those sort of things have been lost forever now. The hope of those have been lost forever. Because of their absolute dependence on Napoleon and his absolute lack of care for them, they're never going to have such hopes fulfilled, because the dream has been corrupted. These simple desires have been corrupted into something which is turning Napoleon into a megalomaniac. Okay, then we have the other more political, I suppose, propaganda that you have here with the idea of Mr. Frederick. And Mr. Frederick is accused of having terrible practices on his farm, and we have on page 60, he had flogged an old horse to death, he starved his cows, he had killed a dog by throwing it in a furnace, all of which sound horrific, no more horrific than what the animals themselves have witnessed, however. But the sensational propaganda that's being spread here on life in Frederick's farm, it's equally ludicrous when you think about what has happened here in chapter 7. Squealer encourages a climate of fear to promote life under Napoleon as the positive choice for animals. And again, the irony of that word choice. What choice do they have? The animals do not draw a parallel between the horrors of Frederick's farm and those that they've witnessed on their own. But we do. The readers do. The readers do draw that parallel. And again, we understand the fear and the horror that is everyday life on Animal Farm, and yet that is being compared to the life on Frederick's farm, and it's Frederick's farm that appears to be the horrific place. We can see quite clearly that the animals do not seem aware of how completely and utterly warped their little society has become. Then we have another example of sensational propaganda in relation to Napoleon, and from Squealer he says, "Thanks to the leadership of Comrade Napoleon, we have won every inch of it back." And here we have with the Battle of the Windmill, that they've won every inch of the farm back. And when you think about it, what Squealer's doing here is what he's done all the way through. He's been factually incorrect. Napoleon's leadership, as it was stated, tells us that in chapter 8 that he directed operations from the rear. It's a cowardly position. Of course, it's the opportunity just to use semantics to hide the fact that he was being cowardly, to hide the fact that he had no real directorial role in that battle. And when you compare that to Snowball, when you had the Battle of the Cowshed, who was always ahead, you can clearly see the difference in these two leaders. One whose leadership is flawed, Snowball, but that he puts his courage to the sticking place. He acts out his belief in animalism, whereas Napoleon does not. He directs operations from the rear, which is just a euphemism for his cowardly retreat away from any position of guidance for his animals at a time when they need him. Semantics important. The verb won is questionable too. Even Boxer, with his stupidity, even he doubts the use of that word won. Can you really win back what was yours to begin with? And you have this idea that Boxer slowly but surely is signing his own death warrant. Again, that idea of questioning the legitimacy of what Squealer is saying, that is going to unfortunately be his undoing. Then we have, after the idea of Napoleon getting drunk and being very sick, you have a rumour went round that Snowball had after all contrived to introduce poison into Napoleon's food. And again, Napoleon using Snowball, taking this ad hominem approach where everything bad that happens is blamed on Snowball. And the pigs use this shadow of Snowball by a means of reinforcing their dependency upon Napoleon. Everything is to make them seem as if they cannot live without his influence, without Napoleon's influence. By using Snowball as a malign influence capable of the most impossible acts, Napoleon can ensure that the animals will always be more scared, sorry, I should have put a D there, more scared of his invisible presence, always seeking protection from Comrade Napoleon. And you know, that takes mastery, that takes guile, doesn't it? To make them more scared of the invisible presence of Snowball than the visible presence of Napoleon, despite the horror that he inflicts upon them on a daily basis. Snowball's poisoning of Napoleon is a necessary lie, because if Napoleon had an inability to hold his drink, then that would make him appear weak or give him some sense of being at fault, fallible. And Napoleon must always be infallible. He must always be right. And the key thing is that cannot be. No one can always be right. And yet, that impossible dream is what he through the power of Squealer and Squealer's use of rhetoric, that's what he can make a daily reality for the animals. They cannot see a fault in their godlike leader. In the late summer, yet again, another one of Snowball's machinations was laid bare. The nocturnal visits of Snowball had mixed weed seeds and corn seeds. The idea that he can be blamed for everything. Every small occurrence on the farm that is in some ways faulty can be blamed on Snowball. And in order to safeguard his position of a faultless and omnipotent, all-powerful leader, Napoleon must ensure that all misfortune and errors are explained away, blamed on enemies. Whether those enemies are Snowball, Frederick or Mr. Jones, Napoleon must always ensure the animals know who is culpable, who's worthy of blame. And it must never be him. It can never be him. The animals take comfort in such lies. They're stupidly rather willing to accept easy answers than ask difficult questions. But even when you think about asking difficult questions, Boxer tries that twice. You know, when he says, "What victory?" When he says, "I do not believe that Snowball was in league with Mr. Jones from the start." Even by asking the difficult questions, there is hope. However, he cannot take that step forward, that extra step of logic to think, okay, maybe we have to doubt Napoleon here. He cannot do that. Psychologically, he is so dependent on Napoleon as an omnipotent ruler, as infallible, as always right, that he cannot make that logical next step, and that's his undoing. And here you have those difficult questions. They had won, but they were weary and bleeding, something that Napoleon never would be, weary and bleeding. He did not fight. He directed operations from the rear. I'm just going to have a wee drink of my coffee here. So Boxer says, "What victory?" said Boxer. His knees were bleeding. He had lost a shoe and had split his hoof, and a dozen pellets had lodged themselves in his hind legs. Look how much he's willing to suffer in order to safeguard animalism, in order to safeguard his leader, Comrade Napoleon, the love, the devotion that he has, the loyalty that he has, and yet that is exploited without one shred of remorse by Squealer and Napoleon. Now, that takes us to this idea of a Pyrrhic victory. So a Pyrrhic victory is one where the winning side loses as much as the defeated side. So, you understand Boxer's question, what victory? The emotional and physical costs of the Battle of the Windmill are apparent by the injuries sustained by the animals. They're weary and they're bleeding. Their spirits as well as their bodies have been broken. And yet Squealer's desire is just to propagate that idea that we've won. And the tragedy of Boxer's simple question is that it comes too late. He is challenging the truth of a system, and in doing so he's signing his own death warrant, which he has done before. What confounds and confuses poor old Boxer is his feelings, his experiences directly contrast with what he's told to feel and what he's told has happened. He is being asked, not for the first time, to trust in the system rather than himself, to trust in Napoleon more than he trusts in himself. And the amount and degree of injury suffered by Boxer illustrates his active involvement in the battle, compared with the leader who has a chipped tail. Like, just look at that. He has a chipped tail, that word choice. Compare chipped tail to what we've just heard about Boxer and his split hoof and his pellets and his bleeding in his knee. And then we see what the proletariat that Boxer represents, what they're willing to give for a system. How much they're willing to give, how much they're willing to lay down their lives for a system in which they believe, and how little their leaders are for a system which is their own creation. But remember, Napoleon's animalism is not the same thing as Boxer's animalism. Napoleon's animalism, it's just a cloak that he wears to hide his despotic desire for power. Even Napoleon, who was directing operations from the rear, had the tip of his tail chipped by a pellet. Now, I like that word, even Napoleon. That idea that even he has suffered in relation to the Battle of the Windmill, that says less about his involvement in the battle and more about the intensity of the battle. The cowardness of Napoleon's position is apparent to the reader, but not to the animals. Yet the truth of the situation must be visually evident when one considers the enormity of Boxer's injuries and the trifling impact of the pellet on Napoleon's tail. So visually, the animals can see that, and yet they do not question. They do not question the idea of Napoleon and his leadership and his courage. Then we have won back what we had before, said Boxer. That is our victory, said Squealer. Again, the manipulation of the truth and the difficult questions that Boxer is asking they're being asked too late. Boxer voices the tragedy of the common man who he metaphorically represents. He has sacrificed everything as the cause demands of him, and yet he has gained nothing. Squealer, on the other hand, represents those in power who offer glittering generalities like victory as a prize worth having. Yet what good is a victory if you're defeated in your heart? And the key thing is, he and Napoleon, they offer these glittering generalities, and they expect them to be absorbed, they expect them to be accepted, and they cannot tolerate for one instance anyone who will question. And therefore we as the reader know what's going to happen next to Boxer. Unfortunately, the other animals don't. Okay, now let's look at how life is developing for the pigs themselves, and importantly here, what we have for in relation to Napoleon, we have a bit of juxtaposition. So Orwell juxtaposes the lives of the elite with those of the common animals. Napoleon has 31 piglets. They're schooled, they're given a garden for exercise, and they're excluded from playing with the others. Again, that idea of separation and difference and distance. In contrast, the hens hatch barely enough chicks to keep their numbers at the same level. Why? Because, of course, the eggs are being taken to be sold. Different attitudes of offspring make the inequality existing in the farm obvious to all but the animals themselves. And of course, we as a reader, we can see that. But this information is being presented in a factual way, in a way that seems to be accepting. No one on the farm is questioning the inequality that is made apparent by the treatment of the piglets and the chicks. Green ribbons make the hierarchy obvious. Ironically, the cyclical nature of the novel is made apparent by the re-emergence of a symbol that was once burnt as being the mark of the human being. Remember, Molly had her ribbons burnt at the end of chapter 2, and now they're being worn with pride, and the pigs are morphing into a more recognisable human shape. And of course, that is Napoleon's agenda. That is his super objective. But it has never been made obvious to the animals themselves. Okay, so let's think about Napoleon and Napoleon's greatest trick then. Because the elite class controls the dissemination of information, how information is given to the animals on the farm, it is able to hide the terrible truths of its exploitation. Remember, individual memories are fallible, and therefore Snowball's bravery and Napoleon's cowardice at the Battle of the Cowshed prove no match for the collective, officially sponsored memory that Squealer constructs. He paints a picture indicating the complete reverse. Remember, the Battle of Cowshed, chapter 4, Napoleon is never in it. He has no presence there. And yet, that memory is completely and utterly warped by Squealer. And that's Napoleon's greatest trick, that he can change the past. Remember, history belongs to the victors, and he is the victor. He can change what happened before. He can change the memory. He has omnipotent power. He can change. He structures the present. He has a plan for the future, and he can change the past. Is he not godlike? In relation to the animals and in relation to this context? Yes, he is. He has power over life and death. With no history or political or military resources at their command, the common animals have no choice but to go along with the charade. And it is a charade. Animalism is a charade. It has been ever since chapter 5. Okay, we have that idea of language being used again to warp meaning. You've got spontaneous demonstrations that are carefully planned. And when we talked about the aftermath of the Pyrrhic Victory, of the Battle of the Windmill, what we have are animals that are psychologically broken, animals that are emotionally broken, and therefore Napoleon understands that. He is a strategist. He understands what he needs to do, and what he needs to do is create some sense of emotional engagement, some sense of pride in where they are as animals on Animal Farm. And so therefore the spontaneous demonstrations are important in instilling that. They force the animals to go through the motions of loyalty despite what they might actually feel. The name of the new ritual bears irony. These gatherings are anything but spontaneous, and they demonstrate very little beyond a fearful need to conform. The irony of the title indicates the overriding hollowness of the event. but also overrides the need, or sorry, what it also does is it affirms the need for Napoleon to come up with new ways to reinforce his power, to ensure his total control. Okay, so when we think then about what has happened, I know this is a little, but I'll read it out to you. So, life now had a greater dignity than it did before. There were more songs, more speeches, and more processions. So again, they're being emotionally fed, they're being psychologically fed with songs and speeches and processions. Not food, but this sort of emotional, psychological sustenance that's being given to them to keep them believing in the cause. It's just a propaganda machine. And then when you think about it, the reality of the situation, this dignity that they have through their songs and their speeches and their processions, the dignity there is based on a lie. The animals are compared to slaves. The misery of their existence is masked by these empty shows of solidarity and belief. The processions make them feel better, but nothing is changing. It's just futile. But what it does is it reinforces conformity. It reinforces some idea of solidarity, despite the fact that the leaders have no sense of solidarity with the animals. Separation and distance reinformed through the cult of, or reinstated through the cult of personality that Napoleon has engendered. Napoleon had commanded the spontaneous demonstrations, and again you've got that lovely verb choice, making the satire obvious. The spontaneity of these demonstrations is completely and utterly denied by the fact that the verb choice commanded is there. Napoleon's clever enough to realise that if he cannot fill his followers' stomachs, then he must at least satisfy their souls with some sense of achievement and pride. And that's what he's doing. He's replacing, he needs to satisfy them. He needs to create some sort of sustenance within them. And if it can't be through food, remember Napoleon in the full manger, then it has to be Napoleon with the full heart, the full mind. And he's filling their hearts and minds with hollowness, with show, not with substance. They find it comforting to be reminded that they were truly their own masters. Oh, isn't that awful? The idea that they would believe such baloney. So what you have here is Napoleon's strategy at work. Lies are easier to swallow than the truth, and empty words distract the animals from the emptiness of their stomachs. The pigs grow fat on the wicked distortions of reality. And again, I'm going to have a wee drink of coffee here, but the idea that so harsh is the animals' lives on a daily basis that they would take comfort in a lie, rather than accept the truth, rather than try to make the truth apparent. It's easier to be comforted by lies, and of course Napoleon knows that. Okay, and then we have the terrible death of Boxer. It takes 3 days for Boxer's death to be announced after he's taken away in the Knacker's van. And what we have is Squealer painting a vivid picture of Boxer's devotion and dignity. He reports it was the most affecting sight he has ever seen. He tells of Boxer's undying allegiance to Comrade Napoleon in the rebellion. The terrible irony is that such lies and fabrications are entirely unnecessary. Had Boxer been allowed to die a natural death, he would surely have had "Napoleon is always right" as his epitaph. But the idea is he cannot be allowed to die naturally. He's weakened physically. He's weakened. His loyalty to the farm has been questioned by the difficult questions that he's posed to Squealer, and he's valuable. He's more valuable as a resource to be exploited for the price of his hide and the price of his bones than as a commodity to be exploited in making produce on the farm. And therefore, commercially, they've the pigs, Napoleon, they have looked at the commercial value of Boxer and decided, well, we'll sell him, we'll make money from him, and also then we can silence the opposition that he was raising, albeit in a half-hearted way, through his questions. No? Okay. So, yeah, the audacity of Napoleon is absolutely unbelievable when you think about it. So here you have the idea that Napoleon is making it clear that the truest happiness, he said, lay in working hard and living frugally. Each and every one of the 24 stones that makes up Napoleon proves how hypocritical he is through such pronouncements. Yes, working hard. What has he ever done to work hard? Living frugally. My gosh, the animals are starving. It's not as if they have a choice in how they live, whether it's frugal or not. And the 24 stones of Napoleon, if you just think about that, the 24 stones of Napoleon make clear the hypocrite that he is. Never once has he lived by these instructions. He forces them on his hungry followers, and the irony of the words and the audacity of Napoleon in promoting them really staggers the reader. But not the animals, not the animals. They believe that this is his mantra for a happy life that he would live by, despite the fact that he's so hideously obese. Somehow it seemed as though the farm had grown richer without making the animals themselves any richer, except, of course, for the pigs and the dogs. Now, if you think about it, is Napoleon a success? On many levels he is. He's a success in relation to what he's done for the pigs and for the dogs. He's made them richer. He's made them into, well, in relation to the pigs, he's put them on a par with humanity. There is a level of parity that has been reached between the pigs and with the humans. And that was his ultimate objective. And in that respect, he is successful. But the narrative voice here, again, it's replicating the confused voice of the animals who find it hard to make a connection between the wealth of the farm and the obesity and the gluttony of the leaders. The dramatic irony here makes the reader increasingly frustrated at the blatant disregard leadership has for those they lead. The pigs no longer hide their gluttony. They no longer have a need to. They can be audacious because psychologically they have broken the animals. The animals believe everything that they are told. They have no qualms in relation to understanding the infallibility of their leader. Therefore, their manipulation is complete. Freedom, total freedom, is within Napoleon's grasp. He can do what he wants, and he knows that he can make sure that it is accepted, and not only accepted but seen as natural by the other animals through the rhetorical machine of Squealer. Now, when we talked about that idea of sustenance, emotional sustenance, psychological sustenance, that's what they have here with the show and the symbols, the whistles and bells of animalism, but all it is hollow ceremony. And when they heard the gun booming and saw the green flag fluttering, their hearts swelled with imperishable pride. And you know, Orwell is being critical of the weakness of the animals to be in this position. So his critique is not just for the leaders but also for those that they lead. Because despite the wicked greed and the inexhaustible ego, Napoleon deserves credit for how completely he has manipulated the other animals. Every fact of their daily life proves that the rebellion failed in its objectives, and yet their emotional response is to these empty symbols of the rebellion, and that emotional response is as strong as ever. Ironically, the animals considered the rebellion solely on an emotional level, whilst the pigs in charge of that rebellion never engaged with it emotionally. It was not, they never believed in it. There was nothing to believe in. Sorry, the computer did something funny there, so we'll just move on to this slide. So, no creature among them went upon two legs. No creature called another master. These are important because these are the few certainties that are left behind in this post-rebellion world. Look at the use of anaphora there, no creature, no creature. But when you think about it, no creature may call another master, but every other creature has made Napoleon into a god. His position has been deified. And this final certainty that no creature among them went upon two legs, that is going to be destroyed now within chapter 10. So tragically, these certainties will be shattered by the whims of the pigs. When these go, what is left to prove that there was ever a revolution? What was left to prove that the hopes and dreams of animalism had ever been achieved? It's important when you think about it that you remember the structure of the novel, and we've talked a bit about how chapters juxtapose each other. So you have the heroic leadership of Snowball in chapter 4, and then immediately following on from that you have the despotism and the tyranny of Napoleon in chapter 5. You have the horror of the show trials in chapter 7, and then you have the ludicrous lightheartedness of Minimus's poem in chapter 8. And now here we are in chapter 10, and what we have is history is repeating itself. The removal of the sheep under Squealer's command, just as the puppies were taken in chapter 3 to be controlled, to be manipulated, to be brainwashed by Napoleon, so are the sheep in chapter 10. Again, this action suggests a climactic event is to come, because remember, the puppies are taken in chapter 3, and then in chapter 5 Napoleon lets out a high-pitched whimper, the like of which had never been heard before, and the new dawn of tyranny through violence is created. And here we expect something climactic to happen too in chapter 10 with the disappearance of the sheep. So be aware of how very important the sheep are. Traditionally they're viewed as stupid and easily led, and these are the qualities that are used by the pigs to make the sheep very efficient tools of government and control. Again, all they're needed for is to drown out opposition, to ensure through their droning, repetitious delivery of 4 legs good, 2 legs better, to drone out any ideas of counter argument within the animals themselves, to replace in the minds the 4 legs good, or 4 legs bad, 4 legs good, 2 legs bad, to replace that with the new doctrine. And remember, this is a new doctrine, not of animalism, but of what animalism has been used to cover over since chapter 5, which is the megalomania of Napoleon. Okay, so the terrifying neighing of a horse sounded from the yard, and here we have the beginning of the end. Clover's reaction to the stark image of Squealer walking on his hind legs makes evident how little aware she and the others were of the ultimate objectives of the pigs, but we've been aware of that. We've understood that. Unlike the reader, they never once believed that the pigs would fulfil Old Major's warning, we must not come to resemble him in relation to man. And here we have Napoleon. He not only wants to resemble him, he wants to be him. And the fact that such a sight as Napoleon majestically upright was enough to make the animals utter some words of protest makes evident that the animals are now aware of how completely they've been manipulated. But like Boxer, their awareness comes too late. It's too late now to understand their manipulation, even on a very low level, because the control has been established. It's total and absolute. And majestically upright. If you think about the diction choices there, the pride, the ego, that all has been invested within Napoleon to reach this ultimate objective, to be a man. And then we have the statement, probably the most famous statement associated with the novel: all animals are equal, but some are more equal than others. It's ironic that the last time Benjamin's persuaded to read out loud, he reads the death knell for the animals' revolutionary ideas. He, of all animals, is most likely to understand the implications of it, yet he does not comment. His apathy is something that has been criticised by Orwell throughout the novel, and if you look at the other animals PowerPoint, we go into that in more detail. Again, language is used by Squealer to condense the 7 commandments into one meaningless phrase, and that's the key thing. It is meaningless. All animals equal, but some are more equal than others. If you think about the 2 clauses there, the second one completely undermines the first. That it makes it hollow. It makes it meaningless. Semantics are used again to manipulate the message to suit the pig's agenda, and what they have done here is by promoting this particular phrase, they've made it very clear that animalism is empty, animalism is hollow, animalism is meaningless. A term used to cover over the duplicity, the selfishness, the egotism that Napoleon had always thrived on and had always wanted to make his own, and he's done that. After that, it did not seem strange. It did not seem strange, and again you have the repetition of it. It did not seem strange. It did not seem strange. How easily this brand new world was accepted by the animals. The destruction of the 7 commandments is the death of all hope, and therefore the defeated tone of the following paragraph is entirely appropriate. You've got an anaphora of "it did not seem strange, it did not seem strange." It suggests the animals have been so rocked by the pig's perversion of everything that animalism has been founded on that they're no longer capable of processing what's happening. They're numbed. So numbed by the experience, no longer have any certainties to hold on to, so they hold on to whatever whatever's thrown to them. The fact that the animals do not know whether to be more frightened of the pigs or the human visitors illustrates how unrecognisable their world has become. Previously, they looked to Napoleon to pinpoint the enemy for them. Remember, we had talked about Napoleon and the ad hominem approach that he had taken in trying to persuade the animals to see Snowball and Jones as the ultimate enemies. But now the enemy is both within and without, and the animals have nowhere to turn. And I think that's an important phrase with Napoleon, because all the way through, the enemy has both... With Napoleon, the enemy has been within and without. Napoleon always makes the animals look out to the invisible enemy of Snowball, or the past enemy of Mr. Jones, or the potential enemy of the humans. Look out. But the enmity, that's very hard to say, but the enemy within Napoleon himself, he was the real threat that we, the reader, could pick up on, but unfortunately the other animals couldn't. Now when they realise that they don't know who the enemy is any longer, if you look at the quotation, whether to be more frightened of the pigs or the human visitors, now when they realise that, it's too late. They've nowhere to turn. They're caught. They're trapped. Final then characterisation of Napoleon. Napoleon himself occupying the seat of honour at the head of the table. And that particular placing of Napoleon is the ratification of his objective achieved. Napoleon's position is the fulfilment of his deepest desire to meet humans not only on equal terms but here in a position of power. Having agreed with Pinkerton's praise of the wretched conditions endured by the animals, he puts the final nail in the coffin in relation to the animals' revolutionary ideals. He addresses each other as comrade, and that has to be suppressed. The parade to honour Old Major would now be abandoned, and his skull, not skill, but his skull buried. The flag was to be changed to a plain green, thus banishing any references to the horn and the hoof, the symbols of the rebellion, and any reference then again to the importance of the other animals in Animal Farm. And effectively what he's doing is erasing that importance, the importance that they have. The signs are that the future of the animals will be worse than anything they knew under Jones, and the final irony comes in the reversion of the farm back to Manor Farm. All that suffering, all that hope, all the potential, all the desire, all that loyalty has come to naught. The animals are not only back where they started, but they're in a worse position, because so total is the control of the pigs that there isn't room for any sense of counter-argument or opposition. Remember, under Jones, there wasn't the psychological control that there is now under Napoleon. It said then in relation to Napoleon, he believed that he was right in saying that the lower animals on Animal Farm did more work and received less food than any animals in the country. And there's a terrible irony in the fact that an outsider, even on such a short visit, so when you're thinking about what Pinkerton can see in just a short visit, can recognise the hierarchy that exists on the farm, while the animals who have lived there for years are completely unaware of that hierarchy up until now, up until chapter 10. Additionally, the compliance and the apathy of the animals not only leads to their suffering, but will be responsible for the suffering of other animals. Pinkerton's plan to mirror the general absence of pampering on his farm makes it clear that suffering and subsistence level living will be the legacy of the rebellion in relation to other animals and other farms. So Napoleon's success is going to be the damnation of other animals across the country, because Pinkerton plans to mirror the atrocious conditions that are now existent in Manor Farm. And then finally, the cycle of corruption completed by the idea that the other animals, in relation to what they see there within the farmhouse, say, but already it was impossible to say which was which. So the narrative voice lets us know that how completely confused the other animals are as to who is a pig and who is a human. What is there to choose between one master and another for the animals? And the story ends much as it began, with the owner of a farm drinking too much, but this time there's nowhere for the animals to go and hear about an optimistic dream of a future with a just society. Lord Acton, in his quotation, "Power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely," completely sums up what Napoleon has done here. He had absolute power, and he used it to absolutely corrupt the dream of animalism that was articulated in chapter 1. Why or how did the animals let it happen? Well, all it takes for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. And Edmund Burke quotation there perhaps is a judgment on what has happened here. Now you can agree with it or disagree with it, but what we have is the circumstances of the animals' lives now are more pathetic, are more horrific than they ever were before. And the futile journey that they have gone on it is a tragic one. We, the reader, are left feeling bereft, that there's no hope. And for the animals themselves, we know that the control there is total. Absolute power has been embedded within that farm, and that is Napoleon's legacy.